Welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast. Coming right up, fresh tips and insights from lodging professionals aimed at helping you improve your business. Our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, which helps improve your guest stay without adding more to your day. Learn how at frictionlessguest.com. Okay, welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast interview. And today we are going to be speaking with Randy Bangs, who is the owner and operator of the Stewart Inn. And he also runs Get Heads in Beds, which is a B&B marketing and consulting firm. And that's really the key angle of this podcast today. And lots of great insights. Great guy. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, really good. I mean, I met Randy several years ago at a trade show, and we were just kind of kicking things off and talked to him several times, many times since, really. In fact, he's actually using our app now and get some great insights from him from an innkeeper perspective. And I've come to realize, wow, this guy does a lot of stuff. He's got his hands in a lot of pots and seems to do them all really well, seems to juggle them and do them all well. And, I like the fact that with his Heads in Beds, we wanted to learn more about it. I know it was kind of marketing based, but hearing about it's pretty cool, pretty interesting. And he brings a unique background as well as maybe a different mindset. He just kind of thinks a little differently. And I think that that's really refreshing. And I think anybody can get some real insight from him. And, we hope to have him on for maybe another podcast because, again, we didn't hit on everything that we probably could hit on with him and his background and his knowledge. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, he does have a wide range of knowledge. And with that, we will kick it over to this Frictionless Innkeeper podcast interview with Randy Bangs, who runs Get Heads in Beds. And we hope you enjoy it. Okay, Randy and Steve, thanks for joining this episode. How you both doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having us.
Awesome, Randy. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing well, Matt. How about you? And, I never ask how you're doing, Matt. How are you doing?
Oh, well, thank you, Steve. That's very kind. I'm doing well. And it's always a pleasure to be doing these episodes. And I'm really excited to speak with Randy. There's a lot of interesting stuff that we learned about him, his organization, when we did our prep call. So with that in mind, let's jump in. Randy, let's start off. Tell us about your background. How did you get into innkeeping and all that good stuff?
Well, I guess the best way I would characterize it, Matt, is I'm a brand marketer who discovered a passion for innkeeping, who then discovered that there was an opportunity to help other B&Bs with the marketing skills that I have. I've been in the innkeeping industry a relatively short period of time compared to a lot of innkeepers. I've been in the industry for about 9 years, but I'd like to think of it more like dog years because I've actually opened 4 B&Bs, personally managed 3 B&Bs, and then I've consulted with dozens of B&Bs across the country. But prior to that, I was in the brand marketing world where I tried to help brands be more successful. And, an inn is really nothing more than a brand. It's just something where there's an operational element to it.
Yeah, there's always got to be marketing. Talk about your marketing because you came kind of from the corporate world. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or consumer side, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, I started out in consumer marketing for Heinz in Pittsburgh. And then after working in brand marketing, I got into executive search work for brand marketing, but very quickly thereafter started a talent scout service for the brand marketing industry where I worked with probably 30 of the top consumer marketing companies in the world: General Mills, Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, SC Johnson, PepsiCo, ConAgra. I had kind of a who's who of consumer packaged goods companies as clients. And then after that, I actually got into the MBA consulting world where I did workshops at MBA schools across the country, places like Harvard and USC and Carnegie Mellon and Vanderbilt and Washington University, and help their MBA students learn how to ace the marketing interview. And then it was shortly after that I actually got into the innkeeping world.
Okay. Yeah. So coming from the corporate side of things, even though you did your own thing for quite a while, what was the reason for wanting to not really do the corporate thing?
I guess the best way I would characterize it, Steve, is there are some who are made to work for others, and there are those who are made to work for themselves. And, I probably fit in the latter camp. I was a very good marketer, but the traditional corporate gig was not really my thing. And, entrepreneurism has really, I think, been a good fit for me. I'm very driven and, for success, but I have a passion for marketing and a love for understanding consumers, because really at the end of the day, our guests are just consumers and our product is our ends. So,
yeah, you can't be just a marketing theory guy or even a marketing practice guy. And as an innkeeper, you can't just do that, right? So you've obviously, your service is, the marketing gets them there, I guess is what I'm saying. But after that, it's all about service. So, you've got at the Stewart Inn, what you own and operate now, you've got quite a track record there, right? Of not just getting heads and beds, as you'd say, but having those heads happy, right?
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate. When I opened my first bed and breakfast, within a relatively short period of time, I was the top rated B&B in the state of Wisconsin. I was the first B&B to ever be a bedandbreakfast.com Diamond Collection property within the first year. And, I did well, but that particular property wasn't the right property for me long-term. So I opened a second property in a more of a touristy market and did well there, but that was a lease to purchase arrangement. And then I came to the Stewart Inn, which had been closed for 5 years. And, within the first year, I had doubled the revenue of the previous owners. And I had discovered that I had kind of a unique, ability to hit the ground running very quickly with my businesses and, also operationalize it. Because you're right. At the end of the day, it's not just about getting people to your property. It's about actually delivering against the expectations of guests. And, here at the Stewart Inn, we're not only a TripAdvisor 5-star property, we're also a Google 5-star property, which, as those of your audience probably know, is relatively uncommon. So, we have kind of an unfair advantage. I jokingly tell my guests, my job is very simple. The property is amazing. Just don't screw up. It's not quite that easy, but it is certainly an ace in the hole when you have a property that was designed by one of the founders of the American arts and crafts movement. And it's a magnificent home and it's in a great location, not a tourist destination per se, but a great location. So,
yeah, well, that's cool. Good. So talk about on the marketing side, the branding side, you want to talk a little bit about, I guess, heads and beds and what that's all about and what services you provide to your client.
Sure. So about 4 years ago, I had to meet with one of my fellow innkeepers, and I rather brazenly said to this person, hey, if you ever need any help with your marketing, I think I could help you move the needle. She called me the next day and she said she'd like to hire me. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, we've got to come up with a contract, I guess. So that was kind of a serendipitous, beginning to the idea of consulting. But the Get Heads in Beds is an interesting model because unlike most other B&B marketing firms, I don't focus on websites and I don't focus on, email campaigns and Google ads. I focus on the branding aspect of the business. What is it about a business that drives their success? How do you effectively convey that? How do you effectively pull the levers that are available to us as innkeepers to make them successful? And, my first client, I grew 65% in occupancy within the first year. My second client, I grew 80%. My third client, I grew 80%. And I was kind of off and running. And it's not that I don't value websites. It's not that I don't value email campaigns and Google ads. I do. And it's not that I'm not involved in any way in those. It's just that, what really differentiates me from my competitors is my focus is first and foremost on understanding who your in is or what your in is, and how do we effectively convey that both, in terms of verbiage, in terms of photography, in terms of, kind of our positioning and our amenities. And it's proven to be a very effective tool.
Yeah. So talk about your approach? Like, I'm a prospective client, let's say.
Yeah.
I'm an innkeeper. I mean, first off, who's a good fit for you? Obviously, if I'm doing really well, I probably am not going to be searching for somebody like you, but I would imagine it's maybe an inn, bed and breakfast that has a lot of potential that maybe isn't realizing it quite yet.
Well, one of the interesting aspects of my business has been that I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of different innkeepers, most of whom have had far more experience than I have. And because of how my model is set up, and my model is set up on a kind of pay for performance basis. So it's really relatively low risk for my clients to hire me. If I don't grow them, they don't pay me anything. If I do grow them, they pay me a % of growth. So yes, you would assume that the clients that would hire me are just those clients who are underperforming. The reality is I have some high performing clients that I've worked with, and I've been able to effectively, substantially grow their business. In fact, I've got one client that I've grown their revenue in excess of 400,000. Actually, two clients that I've grown their revenue in excess of 400,000 within 2.5 years. Most of my client relationships are 1 to 2 years.
Okay. And that's the 400,000 over those 2 years or per year? Is that a per year number?
One of them is 400,000 within the first year. Another one is over 2.5 years. I mean, this was a client that, was a high performing corporate employee who had taken over a business, and they had actually utilized some of the other marketing firms in our industry, and they were experiencing a decline and they couldn't understand what was happening. And so I came on board, and I guess we pulled the right levers and rebranded them. And, we've increased their net operating income over $400,000. So not only the revenue's actually grown. It will grow more than 500,000 by the end of this year. And their net operating income has increased by over 400,000. This was a property that is a select registry property. It's a property that's been in business since the late 90s. It had fantastic reviews. It had good ownership. They'd use Whitestone marketing. They used Q4 marketing. They had professional photography that were done by, I think it was by Christian Gianelli. So it's not like it was a property that had not been utilizing some of the resources available to others. It's just that we were able to, I think, more effectively leverage those tools than perhaps their predecessors.
And you're talking about websites. And I guess because a lot of the companies focus more on websites and Google Ads and that sort of thing is what you're saying. So what do you do that's different? I mean, I'm sure website's a part of it, right? But it's not the focus necessarily. So I'm guessing you look at this as a bigger picture. To me, marketing is almost everything, right? It's branding, it's promotion, advertising, whatever you want to call it, pricing, all of these things. How do you go about that? What's your approach?
Marketing is really the key differentiator in our industry. It doesn't matter how amazing your place is, how amazing your food is, or how amazing your hospitality is. If you can't get people in the door, you're not going to be successful. And like I said, it really starts with understanding the property itself and understanding the management team itself and figuring out what messages can we convey to the consumer that really showcase the property in a way that makes people want to go there. But that also includes leveraging, the tools of the industry, whether that's TripAdvisor or Expedia or Booking.com or Airbnb, or utilizing pricing techniques or yield management. And frankly, even though I portray myself as a marketing consulting firm, I have a significant amount of operational success. So whenever I go and visit with a client, I also talk about, operational elements of the business that they might be able to improve to increase their overall profitability. My focus as an innkeeper is, I think, a little bit unique because I actually run a business myself, and I leverage the tactics that I've used for myself with the idea that they have to be profitable, right? We can all grow our revenue $100,000. The question is, do we grow our profitability in the process? I spend very, very, very little of my clients' money, but I'm significantly able to increase their revenue, which ultimately means increasing their profitability. That's at the bottom line, right? And, I have no interest in just driving someone's revenue without driving their profitability. It wouldn't fly for me. And I use the same standard for my clients as I would for myself.
Yeah. So what about the marketing? I mean, obviously you're not going to give away all of your secrets or whatever, right? But talk about, like, again, what might be some examples of some properties that you've worked with and maybe some of the things that you've done, that might seem kind of unconventional, or maybe it seems obvious to you because you're thinking like a marketer, but what kinds of things that maybe would help properties just in general to say, hey, here's where they go wrong?
Yeah. So what I've done is, which I think is kind of helpful, is I've created kind of a matrix of different marketing concepts and techniques that I've utilized across clients as a template for figuring out kind of what we might do at your specific property. If you were an innkeeper, I mean, clearly I do a site visit, right? Because without doing a site visit, it's really hard to know exactly what the end customer is going to see when they arrive. I want to know what it feels like to be a guest at that property, and what the grounds look like, what the building looks like, how they maintain it. I want to see kind of the flow of the property, and I want to see kind of the food offerings, and see what the innkeeper feels is their competitive advantages. And I want to also understand their market. I don't go to a client's property to just see their property. I go to the client's market to see and understand their market as well, because we all have competition, right? Whether you're the top rated place in the market or you're in the middle tier of the market, we all have competition. It's best to understand how your brand or your inn, compares vis-a-vis other properties out there. And then we also have to look at the customers and who are the customers coming to that market and why are they coming to that market? Because each customer that comes to a market comes for a different reason, or they come for a multitude of reasons, right? And so what is appealing to one customer may not be so appealing to another. So part of the question that we have to answer together, my working with a client, is how many different kinds of consumers are out there, and how can we effectively capture profitably as many of those consumers as we possibly can,
Yeah. And so it's I guess that's a kind of a recent trout using the marketing thing, positioning sort of approach, right, is what you're talking about. They were the positioning guys, I think, from the late, sometime in the 70s, I think is when that was being thrown around. So, but, obviously part of that too is what the property can offer, right? You can't be a kitschy place if it's a very high style type place. You probably wouldn't want to be. Right. So you're leveraging what you've got. And that's what you're saying, I guess, is let me get a feel for the property.
Yeah. The property has to, or the marketing has to ring true and ring through to who the innkeeper is and what the property is and why people might go there, right? It doesn't make sense to market a property for something that it can't successfully fulfill, right? And in a lot of cases, marketing, it's really an interesting phenomenon. When we see it done different, we all say, oh yeah, that was so simple. But it was only simple until someone showed it to us the way it should be done, right? And so it's very easy. I think the biggest issue I have in terms of attracting clients is getting people who are successful to have an interest, and essentially giving some degree of ownership to me, not ownership in the sense that I own their business, but giving some control to me to help them take their property to another level, right? That's a hard thing to do. But by the same token, I've proven with many of my clients, the multitude of my clients, that in doing so, we can make you a better and more successful, property. You asked about a specific, kind of what are some of the techniques and tools and stuff. And, one of the clients that I like to think of is a property that I went to see, and they told me they didn't have much money and the property needed a lot of work, and the decor wasn't right. The photography wasn't right. The website wasn't right. But there was an essence of a property that had real potential. And, so that particular property is the one that even though it's not going to wind up being financially my biggest success story. I mean, I'm going to have effectively grown their business over 150,000 within several years. But there are others that have grown substantially more. But it's the property that I think I'm most proud of, in the sense that I was able to turn it around and to do it in a way that felt comfortable to the innkeepers themselves, and that kind of honored who they were and honored the resources that they had. And we basically completely rebranded them. And, part of what is most rewarding about what I do, Steve, is being able to see an innkeeper before and after working with them, and the confidence that they have. I mean, I remember working with my first client. The client called me about 4 months after we started, and she said, I had to replace the refrigerator. My boiler just went out and something else had happened. And she said, prior to working with you, I would have gone out of business. My husband would never have allowed me to continue operating. And because of the work that we've done together, I'm able to take on those expenses and still see that there's a positive light at the end of the tunnel. And by the time we finished our relationship, her whole persona had changed, right? She was now this really confident, successful businesswoman, and she wasn't when we started. And to me, that was almost as rewarding as the financial numbers that we achieved. It was seeing how she became a different person.
Yeah. And talking about marketing, some people, I think when they hear marketing, they kind of equate that to sales, and they think, oh, well, you've got to be a salesperson or something, or that, let's shine different light on reality. Like, let's kind of pull the wool over the eyes of the person we're trying to market to. And that's not successful marketing, because, what it should be is who you are, what the property is, like you're saying.
Yeah.
You don't sell your soul and say, I'm going to be something different. I'm going to be something other than who I am or what I am. I mean, that's,
it's authenticity to who you are and what the property is, right? That's what sells. Consumers pick up when there's a tension between what is being sold to them and what they're actually receiving. They embrace properties that fit what they were told it was going to be and what actually deliver against what it is.
Yeah. And I think, I think that it comes down to, that authenticity. But at the same time, you also aren't going to get heads in beds if people don't know about you, right? So there is the reality that, or at least you have to have a memorable message, or, make some sort of memorable impression. Like, for example, and it's got to match who your target guest is, right? So if you are trying to get someone who's looking for a relaxing place that doesn't necessarily, maybe want to go out, then, and that's what you can offer, then make sure that your website's showing, more pictures of a tranquil setting or whatever, right? I mean, that's part of it too, is it's the marketing in terms of getting the word out, but it's also making sure that the message is in line with who your target guest is, right?
Right. No, absolutely. That congruency is really important. But I think also what's important too is understanding that there are a multitude of consumers out there, right? And the question is there a way to effectively appeal to a broad spectrum of consumers without being discongruent, right? Without converting your property to something that you don't want it to be, right? In the case of the Stewart Inn, I have probably 4 or 5 very, very unique or singular kind of target consumers. I have the leisure travelers, or the destination travelers. I have the business travelers. I have what I call the drive-through travelers. They're not really looking for an experience when they come here. They're looking for a clean, safe, comfortable place to stay,
But probably unique, right? That's why they're not staying at the Holiday Inn or whatever.
Yeah. And sometimes it isn't that we're unique. It's just that we're affordable to them, right? And we're visible to them. And our ratings are overwhelmingly positive. I think we've had 245 TripAdvisor reviews and everyone's 5-star except for 5, so the confidence that a consumer comes away from that is, wow, this place must really deliver, right? But, we respect the fact, we don't care why you're coming here. What we care about is that your experience here is fantastic, right? In whatever way is fantastic to you, right? Maybe it's just a clean bed and a tasty breakfast, right? Maybe they don't care about our wine reception, or they don't care about our concierge services or some of the packages we offer, right? But for that customer, we need to deliver against those specific elements. The other consumer that we get are people who are coming here for an event or because they have family here, and like I said, every one of those consumers has very specific needs, and understanding what those specific needs are and effectively addressing those consumers. That's really what marketing is, right? It's understanding consumers' needs and wants and effectively addressing those needs and wants and making yourself visible to consumers in as many spectrums as you possibly can, right?
Yep.
A great website alone isn't going to get you customers, right? You have to utilize those other tools that are available to increase your visibility.
Yeah. Matt, I haven't given you a chance to say anything. Not you. You should have known this anyway, because the prep call that we did, Randy and I ended up talking for hours, and this is not the first time. Randy and I met, I think, probably at the AIHP trade show, the first one that I went to back in 2019. And so we've talked several times. But anyway, Matt, what do you got? You need to get us back on track on anything, or are we?
No, I think we're good as long as we keep talking about the get heads in beds. And I do like the more tips to make money with what you have. I think that's probably a really critical element there for most innkeepers, because, most probably have limited resources, but they want to expand their business and get more heads in beds. Right.
Yeah. And what's interesting about your comment there, Matt, is I'm going to be going to speaking at a conference early next month. And I've created some promotional pieces, advertising pieces for that conference. And one of the things that I found really interesting about the dynamic right now is that there are a lot of B&Bs, not all, but there are a lot of B&Bs who with COVID have had a very successful year, right? Better year than maybe they'd had before, right? But the question I'd be asking if I were an innkeeper is not how am I doing relative to last year or the year before or historical. The question is how much better could I be doing than what I've done before, right? And that's one of the things that I think is so tantalizing about the get heads in beds model. We don't charge you anything up front. We come to see your property at our own expense. We only get compensated for the actual growth that you get. And we spend very little of your money in the process, right? So what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is I come out, I give you some suggestions, and we don't move the needle, right? It costs you nothing. What's the upside? I'll give you an example of the upside. I have a client, probably the most sophisticated client I have ever worked with. He runs a property that, has an average daily rate of $300 a night. He's in a touristy market on the West Coast. I'm in the Midwest, right? I'm not in a traditional tourist market. This guy sliced and diced his data every which way possible, and we've been working together for a year now, and we've increased his revenue $150,000. That's a lot. And it's particularly a lot for a person that's been in this business for 15 years or however many years he's been in. And every year he's increased his revenue, but none even close to the amount of revenue gain that he's had this year. And I think he's been surprised at how much success we've had, despite the fact that he's been highly successful, on his own.
So can you give us any insider information on what's a tip that came from him or maybe another past client or whatever that
so there are a couple of things that I think we did with respect to his property that I think were really significant. Nothing decorating. It was a well-decorated property. Nothing in terms of photography. He was well photographed. He had all of that. Nothing in terms of his breakfast. He has a restaurant. His food is fantastic. I think a lot of it boiled down to his website was underperforming. How he marketed himself was not as effective as it could have been. One area where I think I bring a level of expertise that most innkeepers don't have, and frankly, most people, even consulting wise in our industry, don't have, is an understanding of pricing and how to effectively utilize yield management. I think that's an area where it's been, a huge difference. His average daily rate increased by $30 a night.
Wow, it's average. Yeah.
His average, yeah. I mean, that's huge, right? So not only did we drive up his occupancy, but we also drove up his average daily rate, right? That doesn't always happen, right? And sometimes a drop in average daily rate with an effective increase in occupancy is more than worth it, right? The best case scenario is where you can do both, right? You can increase the average daily rate and you can increase the occupancy. It doesn't always happen that way, but at the end of the day, it's about driving profit. Profit, revenue without profit is you're just working harder. Right? Yeah. This isn't about working hard. It's about being more successful. I look at a property like this, if we increase, his revenue $150,000, and let's hypothetically just say that 30,000 of that or 40,000 of that was in terms of increased operational costs. Okay. So there's a net profit gain of 110,000, but using a 10% capitalization rate, which is kind of the going rate within our industry, that $110,000 translates to an increase in valuation of $1.1 million, right? So it's not just the actual number of profitability growth that we bring, it's what we bring in terms of your market valuation as well.
Yeah, which is huge, especially huge. Yeah, especially if you're maybe looking to sell in a couple of years or whatever. I mean,
right. Well, and the other thing which I haven't touched upon, and I was kind of remiss in as I think about it and not conveying this. When I work with my clients, there is no black box, right? I tell my clients everything I'm going to do, and I'm going to teach you how to do it on your own. You don't want a relationship where your consultant is squeezing your profits every year, right? What you want is you want a relationship where you hire a consultant to help you grow your business. They teach you what you need to know, and you can basically take it from there.
Yeah.
And that's effectively how I've set up my program is once you're a graduate of my program, you don't need me anymore. Now, there are clients, there's one in particular I can think of, who have been so successful working with me, they've asked me to stay on, right? To continue working, with them because they don't want to not work with me, right? And we just work out some sort of side agreement or something, but nothing, no compensations, anywhere near what it was, on the up.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the majority of my clients, the vast majority of my clients, once they've graduated, they're able to continue on their own and be as successful, if not more successful, because a lot of times what happens is there's residual value to what we've done for them. So they may grow their business 60,000 or 80,000 or 120,000 in year one, but in year two, they grow themselves another 10 or 15% on top of that, which probably is enough to, frankly, pay for what it costs them to pay me, right? And then it's all in their pocket from there on.
Cool. All right. Well, we're probably going to end up having you back to talk about other things since you're a man with many talents. But before we finish up, talk about one of those talents is, and it kind of is similar to what you do with heads and beds, your approach, at least that you use, and that is buying properties, right?
So basically one of the learnings that I've had is, and it goes back to that valuation thing, is if I can grow a business $100,000 in profitability, that's $1 million increase in valuation. So why not take that knowledge and skills to identify undervalued properties, buy them, grow them, and then essentially I've become a flipper of B&Bs. I purchased my first, I would call it an investment in about a year ago, and I'm going to be flipping it at the end of this year, $310,000 gain. That doesn't happen all the time.
And that's only year half, right? Because you went in half, right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, I wouldn't be making that $310,000 if my partners in this weren't also feeling like they were getting that kind of money as well. Again, it's about understanding how to operationalize things, where the untapped opportunities for growth are, negotiating effective purchases, being an effective communicator in terms of what a property is worth. And then, again, hiring partners or finding partners who can effectively leverage that, and deliver against that. I was fairly successful. So one of the new areas where I'm looking to grow is in terms of finding properties to purchase that I think have significant upside potential. If I'm only going to make $20,000, I'm taking all the risk for very little gain, right? So those aren't the properties that I'm interested in. I'm looking for properties that may have been around for a long time, but because of how they've been marketed, maybe they haven't successfully leveraged all the tools at their disposal. And I can grow their business and then find a buyer for it who's looking to find something where they can be profitable, right? But at the same time, where I can kind of, obviously reap some rewards from that.
Yeah, turnkey type of thing after you've already brought the property.
One area, Steve, where I've had a number of clients hire me is when they want to sell, right?
Right.
Effectively taking them from a point where maybe it's a tough sell to being a much more compelling sell because we increased their overall valuation. So that was kind of interim step to my personally becoming an investor. But nonetheless, it's a segment of the market. I mean, I've worked with literally startup inns. I've worked with inns that are looking to grow. And then I've worked with inns that really want to sell because they're done. They want to get out, but their valuation doesn't match up with a number that seems viable, to them. There's always a viable selling price. It just may not be the selling price that you want. So you have two choices. You either sell at a low price or you increase your value so it's worth the price that you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, I think maybe we can do a future podcast talking about, maybe some of the insights you have having taken over or, looking more as an investor and kind of turning around things. That could be insightful to aspiring innkeepers, maybe to find the right place, or, if they have the know-how, or maybe they want to be partnering up with you to help out. I don't know.
There are a lot of people who want to get in this industry who have most of the tools to be successful, but they may not have the marketing knowledge, and they may not have the financial resources, or they may not have the experience. Part of the value of partnering with me is when we go to a bank and the bank says, well, who's going to be involved with this that has experience? They can point their finger at me and say, hey, take a look at him, right? And so the bank is willing to give them a much lower rate, or much better terms than if they were to do it on their own. And, I love working with people like that who really want to hit the ground running. I've always been amazed at new startup B&Bs and wondered, why would you want to struggle for 4 years to be successful when you could literally work with someone like me and be successful in your first year? You know, I've taken 2 properties that had been closed for 5 or 6 years and doubled their revenue within the first year. And why would you want to open a property, say, well, we'll do it on our own, see if we need you, when you could literally do it with me and achieve in year 1 what you may be lucky to achieve in year 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because year 2, 3, and 4, all that money's in your pocket, plus whatever else we might have grown you on top of, what still might not be able to do.
Compound growth, right?
Yep. And frankly, every customer you have today, the sooner you have them, the more likely it is that they'll be a repeat customer, right? You have more possible repeat customers. You know, that's why occupancy is so important in our industry, right? That's more referrals, that's more repeat potential customers.
Yep, absolutely.
And more reviews, right? You know, because reviews drive success as well.
Yep. Matt, you want to lead us out?
Sure thing. I will lead us out. So this concludes this Frictionless Innkeeper podcast interview with Randy Bangs, who is the owner and operator of the Stewart Inn, and he also runs Get Heads in Beds, which is a B&B marketing and consulting firm. And our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, which helps you improve your guest stay without adding more to your day. Learn more at frictionlessguest.com. Once again, that's frictionlessguest.com. And Steve and Randy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Randy. Really appreciate it. And I hope to be talking with you in the future.